To analyze or evaluate any topic, we're going to need to look into the nuance of it. We're going to have to look, is this a complicated topic? Right, we have to break it down into subcategories. Then we have to analyze those. And then we have to see how they fit together. And what is the overall guiding philosophy behind why this part connects into that? And then an overarching thing that connects smaller concepts and principles together into something that's more coherent, cohesive, makes sense, has like a consistency to how it works, so that this kind of logic here isn't betrayed at this part here. To do this, to be able to have these discussions, we need to develop our language, because language is going to be what we're going to use to flesh this out, to be able to pick things apart, to be able to say, okay, well, since I know what this means, now I can compare it directly to that, and I can see, is there a hierarchy to when I say this term is above or below this other one? So what we have to do essentially is develop our language, develop our terminology. And this is a problem in Counter-Strike and in pretty much in any esports game, because some of these terminologies either haven't been developed or the words exist, but they mean different things to different people. One person thinks this means this, another person thinks it means something entirely different, or they think it even worse. They might think it means something close to that, but actually if you sat the two people down and said, what do you mean by that? Their meaning would be off enough that you two could have had a whole conversation, could have spent years going backwards and forwards, and you realize like, oh, if I'd have known that, then the debate would have been quite different actually, or maybe we don't even disagree, we're just using different terminology. So in developing this terminology, first thing you have to accept is that you're never going to win everyone over. You're never going to actually set the terms of like, this is what this means and it can only ever mean this and it will never mean anything different. No. But you can at least hope, like in this conversation here, that if someone like me actually sets what I mean, then it means that if you've watched this video and you remember it and it made sense to you, and any of it sticks with you, then in future at least, when you hear these terms used, you'll understand what I mean by it. So then, whether or not we can understand each other, or whether you can understand other people, whether you could take these concepts and use them with other people, you can try, you'll get something out of it. But more importantly, at least you'll be able to understand what I mean. So in developing this terminology, part of the reason why I know it's important is because in the history of Counter-Strike, some of the terms that we have now, even these nebulous ones that people aren't sure about what they mean, some of them did not exist in the beginning of days of Counter-Strike. There was initially no terms in Counter-Strike for any role or any position. There was no such thing as, on the most literal level, there was no such thing as the entry man. No one said that. No one had that as their role and their job and said, this guy is our entry man in like 2001. There were players who played that role. Here's the key thing to understand. Those terms, it's not like they were created and then people started doing those things. Those terms are just ways, models that we're putting, like a framework that we're putting over the top of what already exists as a way to describe, a way to sort, a way to differentiate between things, points of reference. This is what we're using here, the language for. So that all these things always existed. There was always a player who had sort of like a lurker type role who came and backstabbed people. There was always a player who seemed to always be the last to rotate and he would win the clutch rounds. There was always a player who was really good in the middle of the round and could get some entry kills and could also do some clutch work, and that's where he'd kind of flow and he'd naturally find his position there. There was always in-game leader, etc. But a lot of these terms did not exist. Like, okay, in-game leaders started to exist. We knew there was a tactician. In general, what I might in this video call a carry, or other people might call a star, that sort of player, we eventually, say like 2005, 2004, this sort of era started to get the term mad fragger. That was sort of as the guy who's going to get all the kills. Then you think of a player like Entryman. I think Entryman really became popularized around like 2003. I think that's a sort of year where that really became part of... Because the key thing is not just that the pro players have to learn this and accept it, but then it becomes part of the vernacular of the everyday person. So in a normal team, you could go into it. And well, not in a pug, because people don't obey those rules. But in at least even a low-level competitive setting of a team, but just not like of pro players, they would start to have these terms and start to understand that this is kind of how we're going to model our teams. Like, once we have that concept in the model, it's not you copy it, but you'll start to understand why interactions of positions make sense there. And then if it makes sense to you and you look at the meta of how the game is played and you see that that's going to make you more successful, then people will pick these things up. That's because one of the points to make here is one of the things that has helped me in defining some of these terms for myself and looking at terms that haven't been that well defined is MOBA games like League of Legends, Dota 2, where these concepts were much more defined and the interactions of them are better understood, to the extent that fans, at least, and lower level players will just accept this as gospel. Like, okay, you have to have this player here playing this role, and you have to have these sorts of carries, and they at least understand that because they can kind of sense, even though they don't know why, they can't describe it, they can sense that this is the best way to play the game. This is the way most likely to win. And if they look at it, they'll see that actually there's something to that. The game, in a sense, wants to be played at that because that's the most That's the most effective model we've currently found for those games. Now in CS, some of these terms, believe it or not, they either loosely existed, or I won't say I invented them, but I had a role in some sense in kind of popularizing the use of them. Because I would always, in fact, if you've noticed in any of my work, my writing or my videos, once I have these terms, which I decide for myself, like who's an elite player, who's just a good player, who's a skilled player, who's an effective player. Once I use these terms, you'll notice that there's a consistency to how I apply them across things, so that when I say something here, it's coherently understood in relation to something I might not have to say right now, but have said in the past. You know that I haven't just suddenly changed my mind completely on those. And so in that sense, because I've always tried to define my work like that, so that someone, if they just at least kept track of my thing, would see what my voice was and what my opinions were, and then be able to maybe make predictions or get a sense for what I would think of something else without me having to write every article in the universe, it meant that at least other people start to use some of these terms too. And now it's gotten quite popularized. But part of the reason I'm making the video is because I don't think people have gone deep enough. Or more crucially, kind of what I was explaining at the beginning, they haven't defined their own personal dictionary of like, what do these terms mean to you? And then how do you see the terms interacting? What are the principles that you then see following on? So now that we've got that sorted, one of the problems we're going to run into in CS, which is also a problem, by the way, that exists in the MOBA games, but it's not talked about that much in the MOBA games. I actually did a video along this topic called like roles, carries, and supports, but it was for League of Legends, where I kind of went into this. So I'll just briefly go over a very small concept there that isn't complete to the done games, but it'll work in CS as well, which is that one of the problems even using in the term role is that role has been conflated with the term position. Like in League of Legends, the top laner that's a position. Every team must have a top laner, in theory. But if you're talking about a role, people will say, right, top lane's my role. Well, actually, I'd say role is usually better defined. If it was up to me, if I could go back in time and make everyone start over, I'd say role should instead be where you are on the spectrum of whether you're a carry, where you have like everything's designed for you, you get to do what you want, you have the main focus of the team, or supportive, where you're doing more things for the team. You're doing more things to set those people up to carry the game. I'd say that is a better term for role. So if I could say my position in League of Legends is top lane, but in my team, I'm actually not the most skilled player. My best player is mid lane and AD carry. So I'm more of a supportive one. So my position is top lane, but my role is supportive or hybrid support or whatever. Because if people don't do that, you get into a lot of confusion in terms of how people describe the system of their teams. But the reason why I bring this up is because in CS, first of all, some people who are fans, and even some players maybe, are in denial that the concept of the role like that exists. And in terms of position, some of them also, that's the problem with the role aspect. A lot of players are in denial that they might be a more supportive player. They think, my game isn't on at the moment. I want to get more frags, and if I can contribute more, that guy isn't the star on my team. Don't give him all the credit. Like, if I was able to do that, I could be the character. Like, all this weird nebulous stuff, and kind of gets in the way of things, actually. So now let's go into, here's the problem though. In this actual video, despite what I've just said there, I'm kind of going to have to go back to the term role, because that's just the way it's used. And so instead, I'm just going to try and define it for myself. So if we're talking about roles, then we're going to do it like this. I'll try and break them down to the ones I think are worth talking about. So you've got entry man. Everyone knows what this is. The guy who goes first into the site, at the site that we're mainly going to attack. Now that in itself causes confusion, because what if it's one of those strategies where you spread out on both sides of the map and you probe two areas at once? Who's the entry man? Well, luckily, that's where it works out, because usually there's another position where even if we were attacking one site, we'll have a second entry man. Or in this case, this is a role that we haven't actually defined a term for. No one has given it one. People usually will just also call it an entry fragger. But I think it should be separately defined, because I think a special type of credit should be given to the guy who's the first entry fragger, because he's most likely to die, draw the fire of the enemy, and either he gets some amazing kills and wins the whole round for you, or sets the whole round up to be won, or he's going to die first. Whereas the second entry man has a much better chance of getting kills, because he's shooting people that are maybe aiming at the first entry man, or the first entry man's done damage to, or they've used up bullets on the first entry man. So the second entry man has a much better chance of getting kills. Now I would call this either second entry, or secondary entry if you want to call that guy primary entry, or follow-up. How about follow-up as a great term? Because the idea is he follows up on what the entry guy does. Then we have another one that is not very well defined, but I'll give it my own term. I'd call it middleman, or you can call it mid-round player, because I think of it as the player where that's the guy where he's skilled. I want him to be going into the site. I want him to come in. I want the other two to have done a lot of work. I want him to come in, or if they fail, he's still got the ability to come in around and do something. But because he's got a lot of skill, or he can play both aspects, he can play some entry, he can play some more defensive style, he can play retaking sites, he can play going for 1vx scenarios. This is mainly T-side I'm kind of describing here. Then I'd have him mid-round. So I'd call him middleman or mid-round player. Choose it for yourself. Now we've also got sniper. Now sniper, also called AWPer. AWPer's fine because it's the main sniper rifle weapon. Obviously that needs its own role because it's going to be used very differently than rifleman. It's going to be different positions he holds, different order maybe depending on his skill set of when he goes into sights, etc. Then we've got the in-game leader, but you can also maybe call the in-game leader the support player, because on certain teams that don't have a great in-game leader, a great, brilliant tactician, he'll often just play the support role. And actually, the majority of in-game leaders do just play the support role. And when we talk about the support role, he's essentially, his role, yes, he still has to get kills if he's presented with them, but his role essentially is to be in positions and perform actions which set up the other players who are the more carry roles to succeed and be able to do what they need to do their best. So whether that's watching their back, or throwing a flash for them, or putting a smoke down for them, or running in to draw some fire for them, or running in to back them up and add in some firepower when they're taking on a spot, or just to be in a certain spot that cuts off an enemy being there, therefore this guy doesn't have to worry about it. I guess that's covered by covering the flank. Now the final role is going to be lurker, but there's multiple names you can have for this. Lurker, flanker. The old school name, the Swedish one, used to be backstab, because the idea was you come from behind them when they're rotating. Like if you think of Dust 2, if you're on terrorist side, and you've just gone a catwalk and you've gone up long A, and that was your attack. It was a split A, the oldest tactic in the book, where you send 3 catwalk and 2 long A. Now, if you do that timed attack, that's the normal way to do it, okay? So a lot of this, terrorists, CTs rather, in the past on Dust 2 would just rotate through the CT spawn. Now if they do that and they don't send 1 catwalk, then in a world where you only sent 2 catwalk and 2 long, you can have the backstab guy who's maybe playing towards B and then came down the lower B tunnels, who can come out of the middle, and if he times it right, either he holds a CT there, he kills a CT there, or he comes behind the CTs as they're coming up through their CT spawn. So that's the traditional role we're thinking of there. Often playing off the other side or in the middle area, or just away from the main group, but his play is always in reference to what the main group is going. So there's the roles. Let me think how many I've got there. We've got entry, follow-up, middleman, sniper, in-game leader / support. I've made them 1 role, and lurker. So we've got 6 roles overall there. Let's try and put these into a team and see how they would work. So first of all, I want you to visualize a terrorist side. Now we're going to have a terrorist side where, in theory, most terrorist rounds work like this in Counter-Strike. This is how we're going to do it. Eventually, we're going to pick one site that we actually do want to attack. And when we attack it, in an ideal world, we'll have all 5 players alive, and 4 of them will attack the site, and then our lurker or flanker or backstab or whatever won't directly attack the site. He'll hold either the flank, or he'll be at the other site causing trouble, or he'll be watching for rotators in the middle area. So there'll be a 4 and 1 split. The main 4 people who are going to attack the site, and the one that's off, who's the lurker. So okay, we'll start with the 4 that are going to attack the site. We're obviously going to start with the entryman. So the entryman's going to go in. Then we're going to have the follow-up / the second entryman. He's going to follow the entry guy in, and assuming we're not just going to change our mind and pull back off the site there, which obviously mid-round calls are made and it changes, but we're imagining a computer simulation here. Everything goes according to plan. The second entry, the follow-up's going to go in. Now the third guy, the middleman, he's now going to come into the site. We're going to have 3 people in the site now. Now finally, the 4th guy is going to be... Oh, by the way, I should make that point out as well. The middleman, in this scenario, can also sometimes be the in-game leader. That's also another spot where, ideally, in our conceptualized world, our entry guy, a second entry guy, follow-up, and then the middleman, it can just be the mid-round player, or it might be the in-game leader, depending on the skill set of the in-game leader, or what type of team we have, and how good the first 2 players are. Now, the 4th player into the site, typically, is going to be the in-game leader, or the support, or the AWP, because AWPs in general want to have more defensive angles and want to not get picked off, and want to get into a site that's already taken over so they can set up for the shot on the rig taking pick. They don't want to be the guy going in there and then worrying about being killed, because AWPs are less mobile. So the 4th guy, and typically, is going to be the in-game leader, the support, or the AWP. Now the last guy into the site, if he ever comes into the site, which often he won't, is going to be the lurker. It's going to be the flanker, the backstab player. Now, I'll explain that T-side to you, this conceptualized, idealized version of it, by using a team that existed. And I'll use the most famous team in CSGO history. It's going to be the classic NIP lineup. So, the classic NIP lineup, and for the sake of this one, we'll imagine they're attacking... Inferno is going to be the map they're playing, terrorist side, and they're going to attack the B site. This is how I would conceptualize the classic NIP. The first guy into the site, in banana, you're going to attack the B site, is going to be Freiburg. He's going to go in there. He's going to immediately take a duel on, but he's going to be moving quickly through the site to draw fire, to draw attention onto himself. He's going to take a duel. He's going to advance and gain ground view. That's a key aspect of the entry role. Now, the second guy into the site is going to be Forrest. He has probably the best aim in CSGO. At least he did at one point in time. So he's going to come in, and as Freiburg is taking a fight, and maybe he dies but puts damage onto that guy, Forrest is now going to take a duel with that guy, but that guy's got less health than Forrest does. Forrest has an advantage to kill him, as well as having better aim anyway, where he would win the duel anyhow. Or the other people are all still looking at Freiburg, who's gone in, the entry man. Now Forrest, to follow up, gets to shoot people who aren't even looking at him. Or Freiburg's given him the information on where they are, and Forrest now can use his superior aim and ability to out-duel people one-on-one to even know where the enemy is. He doesn't even have to track the enemy down and give the enemy a little bit of a jump on him. Forrest now comes in, the follow-up, the secondary entry, let's say. The third guy, the middleman. Now, this is why I say sometimes the in-game leader can do this role, because in this particular case, the in-game leader could be, if it was another team, maybe it would be Happy or someone. In this team, it's going to be Exist. Exist is both the middleman, in terms of actually he is the mid-round player, and the in-game leader. So that's what he's going to be doing here. He's going to come in third. He's either going to mop people up, or he's going to take the site once the other guys have been killed, and then he's going to hold against 1vx situations, 2vx situations when the enemies are retaking it, because he's good. He can do a bit of fragging. He can do the middle round aspect, but he's also someone who's capable of winning the clutch round situations. This is an ideal position to have him in. And because of his position here, he's also going to be able to, since he does loose calls in NIP, he's going to be able to see what's going on with the entry guys. He's going to be right there with them and playing off them. And he's going to be able to coordinate the support player behind him, or the flanker or whatever, what they do and whether they join him in the site or whether people back off. So that's how NIP is going to play. The fourth guy into the site is going to be our support player in this case. It's going to be Fifth Laren. Or when he was in-game leader, maybe he would have been the in-game leader there. It's going to be Fifth Laren. And remember, NIP didn't have a dedicated AWP, but Fifth Laren also played the AWP role anyway. So he's going to be the fourth guy into the site. The site should be taken at this point in time. If he's ever coming in, the site should be taken. And who is the last guy, the fifth guy, the lurker, the backstab, who in most times is not going to join us in the site? It's going to be Get Right. He's going to be the last guy. And there we go. That's how the classic NIP, you conceptualize them on a T-side. So you can see there how I got all the roles and fitted them in there, depending on which ones you have. Because remember, there is 6 roles. So it's not. So first of all, you can combine some of them if you need to, like in-game leader and support. Or you might not have one of them. Like actually some teams you could argue, like Hellraisers don't have an in-game leader, jokes. Or you could say that some teams don't have a sniper for obvious reasons. Or some teams might not have a lurker if that's not their style. Now, let's talk about the CT side of the game now and see what we're going to do with... Because we're going to have different roles for CT side, actually. This is another interesting part. The more you break things down, the more you can make a model, the more it'll make sense. You don't have to crowbar something into only 3 categories. You can make more categories and define them. So on CT side, we're thinking of sites again. So now, again, let's go with Inferno. Now, the big site, the A site, let me think, is it the A site? Yeah, the A site, the biggest one, the one on the left when you spawn in CT. The reason that fucked me up is because in the source they retardedly switched their names around. I don't know why. And the rule, by the way, a quick rule of thumb for anyone who doesn't know in CS, by default, we define the A site by the one that's physically closest to the spawn. That's how you can always tell on all maps which the A site is. So the big site... The first thing we're going to have here is going to be what I call the main big site carry. Now, on Inferno, the main position I'm probably going to put him in is going to be in that big pit, the one with the car in front of it, where the terrorists come out of the balcony, and that's like a main area there he has to cover. Because he has to hold the main site, like it's very hard for that guy to stay alive and the whole site to be overrun. That usually doesn't happen. He's the main big site carry. And then with him in that site is going to be the big site support player. And the idea of this player is he's going to coordinate with that guy and be like an assistant to him and help keep him alive. And they're both going to work together in terms of where they're watching and how they communicate. And maybe sometimes doing crossfires and focusing on the same area. So in Inferno, we think of the guy who plays more towards the middle of the site. So he's the guy who maybe plays up close in the let me think. I think you call it the lane in America. That bit in front of the car that goes up to the house area. He's going to maybe play that area. He's going to play in the site. And the idea is he's coordinating with the big pit guy as his support in that sense. Now we're going to have the middleman. Now the middleman's going to play the library area. He's going to play the arch area. He's going to play the right side of mid. And in general, he's going to be the first guy to rotate to the B site. But he's going to play this mid area. And he's going to coordinate to some degree with the big site, support. Now then, let's go over to the B site. Our main guy inside the B site, in general, is going to be the big site, the small site rather. Fuck, I fucked that up. I'm not restarting. The small site is going to be the small site carry. So he's the guy who we want him to be around the fountain, to be dicking around the different boxes, to pick different angles, sometimes on the coils. He's going to be around these positions, and his main job is just stay alive, hold off the site, hold off the enemies coming in, either delay them, kill as many as you can, waste as much time as you can, communicate as much information as you can, and crucially communicate with the other guy who plays that site. Now the last guy, the other guy who plays that site on Fictional CT, is the small site, I'll say support, but really it's more like rotator. Because to a degree he's supposed to be supporting the main guy in the site, but he's also a rotator over. And oftentimes, because the other guy has to stay alive, sometimes this guy will be more of a carry. And so what's funny is in some roles, we often think of the guy who's the small site guy as a support player. But in this sense, I'm going to call him the carry because the dynamic of how Infernal CT works, I actually want him to be like a strong player who's going to carry and be like I'm going to set him up essentially to do what I want. We'll now do the same thing. Instead of using one team, which I could do again, I'll actually just make myself a fictional Inferno CT team, and I'll try and fit someone to all those roles in terms of like almost like an ideal sort of player for that sort of a role. And in general, I'll try and go with modern day players, but some of them I might veer on, okay? So I'll start at the A site again. Big site carry from the main pit, okay? Main A site, A, big site carry. He plays in the pit, roughly. He doesn't have to play there, obviously. If I think traditionally, I already know who I want for that. It's going to be Shocks. It's going to be Forest. These guys can hold that spot down because, first of all, they're incredibly skilled and they have really good single bullet aim at all distances. Therefore, because that's the thing about that particular position, you can choose your angles if you want and really force enemies to come at any range you want. Like if you want, you can have them all come at mid-range and you never have to go further than that by only looking at certain angles, and you can have them all, to a degree, go close range if you really do hide behind certain spots. But if you want to be really good at that spot and you want to be able to hold against all sorts of terrorist attacks, you want someone who's good at all ranges. And so Shocks and Forest can shoot really close range if people come in on them. They can shoot more towards the medium range if a guy comes out of that house area or comes into the lane. And they can shoot long range if they have to look to their right and look down towards the CT arch because the terrorists have wrapped round on them. They can shoot all three of those ranges. That's why they're phenomenal at this spot. So Forest and Shocks, that big pit main site carry. Now we want the support player to go with them. Now in this particular sense, believe it or not, I would actually give it to someone like Get Right. Because the way this synergizes with someone like Forest is going to be very good. He's really good at mid-range. That's where he's a monster. So you want him around mid-range. You want him to be able to move around and pick different spots to synergize with that guy and to know, well, if he's watching this, I can go watch this instead, or I can gamble and go push up the lane or something. He's a great person to have in that position. If we're going to go to the middleman, the guy who plays usually library or right side of mid on the arch, there's two of them, believe it or not, who actually play in the same fucking team, which is Smiths and Kiyoshima can both do that role. Now, they'll do it differently. Kiyoshima will be a bit more aggressive when he does it. Smiths will only be more aggressive in general when he's got the AWP when he does it. Smiths will play more towards that little cubby area. Kiyoshima will just straight up take aim duels with people mid and let them peek out and go back. But in general, he's going to do that. And he's going to be someone whose fights are going to happen with him. It's very unlikely people are going to get in the site without him being engaged in it in some way. But he's also going to be able to rotate to the other site if needs be. Go to the small site now. Now, the easiest way to pick these two, obviously, is that Fnatic has the two best players at this particular setup on CT. They have Crims is the small site carry. He's the guy who just stays in the site and he holds you off. He kills as many as he can. He tries to consistently kill a certain number. He communicates information and he wastes as much time as he can. He's the best at that. So we've got Crims for that. Now, who's the support for that site, but the rotator as well? Well, in his team, it's Olaf M. And he's going to... When he knows Crims has got it locked down and he can gamble, he can go over to A and they can have 4A. When he knows that they're going to attack B, then he can stay with Crims and he can play off Crims. He can use the information Crims gives him and he can give information Crims if he peeks up or goes through a smoke or something to allow Crims to do his job better. Olaf M's one of the best at that. Another player who's very good at that, by the way, is Happy. Happy also plays that aspect. I think he sometimes abuses the smoke aspect of something. He should play a little bit more spot at times. But in general, that's something he does, the way he synergizes with NBK. And... that's my fictional CT team. So now that we've talked about this concept, let's also make a really important point clear here. Now, when I'm talking about carries and I'm talking about supports, the reason why I've kind of set that up differently mentally is because all those roles I've described before, yes, in an ideal sense, like in League of Legends, etc., there are traditional positions on the map that are also just by default traditional carries. and traditional positions that are traditional supports. But depending on the skill set, here's two things: the skill set of the player, and crucially, this is what it has to match with this: the personnel of his team. That's what really should decide where the player is, depending on his position on the spectrum of support to carry. And between support and carry, here's an important thing to make a point of. I have a third position I call hybrid. Now, if you want, you can just call this half carry. But I prefer to call it hybrid because it means a similar thing. But also hybrid purports the ideal, which is for me that the guy can do both. It's not just that he's a half carry, as in like he can do a little bit of support, and he can sort of do. It's the idea that if he really wanted to, he could go either way. But he's skilled enough that he shouldn't just be a support player, but he's got enough tactics and ability to play with the team and synergize, and able to sacrifice that you wouldn't want to just waste him only as a full-time player, when you could have him here better than any other player, his opposing position, but have other carries who can't do that. So that's the hybrid / half carry role. Now, if we talk about the reason why I make the distinction there, that it'll depend on personnel to whether you're a carry or a support, even by position, is because the traditional thoughts don't apply here. So in general, dedicated AWPer, the guy who's the main primary AWPer on your team, is going to be a carry on most teams, right? He's the guy we give the AWP to, he gets most of the frags, he locks the spot down. If people attack him, he kills them more than they kill him. That's our general main primary AWPer. But an AWPer does not have to be the main carry. He can be a support player. Now, Smith's was a support player, but he was an AWPer. And he could be effective as an AWPer, and he could hold a spot as an AWPer, and he could play less full-on. So if you think of how Kenny S, who's the best example of a full-on carry AWPer, how Smith plays the AWP compared to Kenny S, yes, they have certain shots are similar, but their style and approach and mentality on how they're going to play the position, and then the personnel of their teams, how their teams are going to work around them and integrate what they do into what they do overall, into what the team is doing overall, is going to be very different. So there's an example of how you can be a support or a carry at the AWP position. Now, likewise, what traditionally, this is why it's a problem to use the term support for the other initial role, the one that I said, either the in-game leader or the support, the guy who sets things up on the T side, why that's more of a difficult role to call support is because when people call that a support, you can also do these more supportive roles, which are kind of like giving up a lot and it's very hard to do, and you're going to be kind of the bitch and you're going to get killed a lot. That role can carry the game, can be the hardest carry in the game, because we've got a great example. Crims is the best carry in the world. Actually, that's ridiculous. Kenny S is the best carry in the world at the moment, but Crims at times can rival him. He can be up there. And what makes it, in some ways, more impressive in Crims' case is that Kenny S plays a primary traditional carry role. Crims plays a role that traditionally was a supportive player role that you're not usually a god. Usually you don't put your best player there. In fact, you usually put like a hybrid carry there who can do a bit of holding off this, like for an Inferno B, for example, hold off some people, but if he dies, you're not worried about the fact that you've lost the round because you don't have your best players to do retakes and stuff. In this sense, Crims is amazing because he can be the best player in the world, yet he's not doing it from a traditional carry role, so you don't have to from there. Likewise, Lurker in general would be either a support player, so his job is just give us information, just do some distraction, doesn't even matter if you kill anyone, or kill someone if you can and backstab if you can. In general, that's either going to be a supportive player or it's going to be like a hybrid half carry guy with a bit of skills, but you don't want to waste him because again, he's not going to be in the site getting kills for you. But that player can carry the game and be the full main star carry player in our game. Get right. We think famously, if you go look at his 2012 and the majority of 2013, he was unreal. He was out of this universe for how well he could play. He could carry the whole game, a whole series, a whole tournament from that position. Likewise, the typical carry roles, we should probably define those. In general, in an ideal world where I could pick any players to go with any players, the way CS probably wants to be played at the moment with how we model it and how the other teams play, therefore what our response should be to them, would be that the typical carry roles should be the secondary entry man, or follow-up, as I call it, the mid-round player, middleman, and the primary AWPer. Those should be the three roles by default, where if you could pick any players, those would be the ones I'd pick to carry the game with. So thinking of some examples of those: primary AWPer, Kenny S, secondary man, Forest, mid-round player, Shocks. You can see those are three of the best players ever, three of the top 5 players that ever play CSGO. They play traditional roles, and it makes a lot of sense as to why they're the best ever, etc. Now then, when we started to talk now about supports, carries, you can see that it's always in reference to who else you have on your team. It's not just the player. Remember, we can define what the player does, but then the personnel of his team. Who else is on his team? What is required of him as a result? What does he do here, but what does the team need? Maybe you've got a lot of fraggers, therefore actually a bunch of people can get the frags, but now someone isn't able to do something else. You haven't got good flashes, don't have people who synergize well with each other, don't have good communication, don't have someone who's going to follow up, but in a sensible way in terms of positioning. He's just going to run in and try and frag with you. As a result, when you're constructing a team, you want to be thinking, or at least when you're analyzing a team, of what is the formula of how CS in general wants to be played. Now, in general, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I think in general it has carried a similar formula just because of how the dynamic of the game works. A lot of the maps have similar dynamics from 1.6 into CSGO. But I will say CSGO to some degree is a little bit more skill/aim heavy. Therefore, it has lent itself a little bit towards there being more carries, more carry roles, and as a result, less supportive roles within the game. So in CS 1.6 and in general in CSGO, I'd say the default for how you should play should be to have a number which, if you were to put carry potential onto it, would add up to 2.5. That would be your overall number out of a possible 5. 5 would be the max. If you had, if one player is a carry and a half carry, a hybrid start is at 0.5 of a carry, and a support player is 0 of a carry, then the max you could have in a team would be 5 carries, but that would not be good, as I'll explain. And the minimum you could have in terms of carry potential would be 0. So the ideal in general is going to be 2.5. And the ideal way to divide it up would be to have a carry, another carry. So we've got 2 carries, a hybrid carry, so 2.5, and then a support player and a support player, 2 supports. So two carries, a hybrid carry, and 2 supports. That would be the default formula from which I would start to conceptualize a team, build a team, and then see if I have to switch someone around or have someone change what kind of carry potential they have to have in the team, if they're capable of that, if I need to get a different player. This is a way to conceptualize the game. Because once you have that in mind, you'll be able to see what teams lack. I'll give you the general trends of what the different distributions of carry numbers like that will have effects generally as a trend on a team, so you can think of this for yourself. Because a layer that I can add on top of this is that when we're talking about carries here, in general, we're talking about like skill and like fragging ability. And the reason why I define it like that is because what we give up in skill, we're going to assume, in terms of how we make the team, we're going to try and replace that with team play and tactics. Now, team play is very loose. You can have that with a lot of skilled players, but you can have inbuilt team play in as much as support players whose job it is to figure out a way to work with him. I know what his tendencies. I know when he needs a flashbang here. I know when he needs this kind of cover, when I can play off him. That sort of a support player has to have a different sort of mentality and a different sort of focus to them than the guy who's the main carry, and his job is to get the kills and to be where he wants to be and to be a little bit selfish because we want him to be just winning his fights and taking fights that are favorable for him. So in that sense, what we give up in some carrying, we're going to get back in supportive and team play. That's why, if we're going to do the same thing again, okay, in general, we're going to give the star player, the 2 carries, they're going to get 0 each for their supportive/team play threat. Let's do the same thing. So carry potential, carry threat, support threat is going to be like team play and tactics threat. So we're going to give them 0 each, but we're going to give the hybrid carry, the half carry, 0.5. Same again, and we're going to give the supports a 1 for each. So you've seen what I've done here. The overall number you can have in your team is going to be 5 no matter which way you go. But in an ideal world, it just so happens you're going to want to have 2 carries that have the carry potential, a middleman who has half carry potential, half support team play potential, and the 2 supports who are no carry potential, but they have all the tactics and team play potential. 2 for them. So we're going to get 5 overall. That's how we're going to try and get it if we can. Ideally 2.5 from each. Now, if you want to talk about that, let's give some examples of distributions you can have here. So first and foremost, let's go with my ideal formula, shall we? If we're talking about a team that has 2 carries, a hybrid/half carry, and 2 support players, I'm going to make this the classic NIP lineup. That's what I'm going to say the classic NIP lineup is, when it worked properly. Because when it worked properly, to me, I thought of NIP like this. Forest and Get Right are the main carries. In fact, if you want to go in terms of order, Get Right and Forest, they're the 2 main carries. They're my full carries, and when I'm at my best, I want them being the full carries and having that impact on the game. And as long as they do that, If everyone else is in their position doing their role, then we will win the game. And in this sense, we will be the best ever because we have the right players, some of the best at all these aspects, and we fit the meta of the game. That's why we're the best ever, as well as having good players. So we've got Get Right and Forest as our 2 carries, our 2 star players. Who's our half/hybrid? Now, here's what is interesting. In different eras of time, I feel like what's made Nip very good is that they've been able to swap it so that it was exist at certain times and so that it was at Freiburg at other times in terms of how they worked within the team, how they adapted when they weren't the half carry. But in general, if I have to pick one historically, I'm going to have Freiburg there. He's going to be my half carry, my hybrid carry. So I've got my 2.5 already set up. Now I need 0 in terms of carry potential, but I need 2 in terms of team play, right? So I've got Exist and I've got Fiflaren. Now Fiflaren, yes, obviously he's the support. He's giving me my 1 there. I've got my 1 support potential there. Exist, at times, sometimes could be the hybrid guy, but actually he's at his best when he doesn't have to frag. If Exist top frags in a game, watch out, because actually Nip is probably not going to win that game. That suggests there's something off with the dynamic of the team. He shouldn't even be in position to get some of those kills because some of his better players and his carries and those roles should be getting them in terms of how they would encounter them on the map and the situations they would be put into. So it's actually a bad sign when Exist's top fragging in that particular sense as a general trend. Obviously there'll be occasional games it's fine. In general, he's at his best when he's just left to be a support player because he actually he's quite a clutch support player. He has good confidence in himself. He's not like a support player who's forced into it because he's shit and doesn't have good aim and he's like down on himself and he can't win those battles. He's clutch. He can get some kills. He's not required to, though. That's exactly what we want. There's the classic Nip lineup. There's the 2 carries, the hybrid, and the 2 supports. So let's go through all the permutations. Not all of them, but the relevant ones. And what I'll try and do, actually, is I'll define the permutation, how I distribute the carry potential, and then what I'll try and do is give you an example of that. So you can kind of see, you're already starting to visualize how I'm seeing those teams, and then you'll also get a sense of what the trend with the team is and see if that fits. So the reason why the normal one, the classic Nip one that works, is because we've got the 2 main carries, and in this sense we had the 2 best carries. So that was already we're off to a winning start. The hybrid carry, he is a hybrid, remember. He can sometimes do some carrying, but it's not going to be required of him because we have the 2 best carries for start off. And then when he does add it in, sometimes when Freiburg would have a huge game and Get Right Forest would, they were unbeatable. You could not beat them. I would guess they've maybe lost like 5 maps ever where the 3 of them were going completely ham like that. Like it'd take some absolute shitting of the bed from the others for them to lose in that scenario. And Freiburg sometimes doesn't have to contribute in a carry potential sense. He can just play his role. He can go in there. He can die every time. If his 2 carries are totally on fire and his supportive players are playing right, they're going to win there as well. So you can see how it'd break up there. that's a very balanced lineup. And that's why I always that's my conclusion when I think of why Nip dominated. It wasn't just that they had the best players. It wasn't just that other people didn't know how to play the game. It's that if you break down the roles like I did in this video, at every role, they either had the best player for his role or they had the best, a top 2 or 3 player at his role. And then when you add it all together and how they work together, then the best team ever. Let's go to a team, let's go extreme. We'll start off in an extreme example, okay? So we'll say a team that tries to have 3 full carries and 2 supports. They have no hybrid. They just have 3 full-on carries. Now immediately, obviously, that team's going to lack some support play. Now, it's not that they can't win. That's just going to be the trend because they're going to have a lot of firepower. They have more firepower than our idealized team, even though sometimes the idealized team, when the hybrid player is having a carry type game, could match them. But in general, this team's going to have its strength is going to be firepower. They can overrun you. They're probably sick front runners. They can batter you down. They're going to be in a position where what they might lack for is support play. Now, whenever you have a deficit like this, first of all, you can make up for it if the players who do play those roles, which is what we're lacking, can go above and beyond, obviously. If the support players play super amazing in terms of their tactics and the gaps they can fill in, it can make it so we can just have the main carries. So we've got the 3 full carries, we're going to sick aimers, fraggers, everything. We're going to run over people, and we're going to only have 2 support players, and we're going to hope that they can do enough to help us win. So what team am I going to pick for this? Which is going to lack a bit of support play, and that's what's going to cost you. I'm going to go with Hellraisers that was at DreamHack Winter 2014. So in this particular team, I'm going to say that my 3 full carries are Simple, Dosia, and Marklov. Now, I know what people are going to say already, yeah, Marklov wasn't that good and he wasn't playing that. Yeah, that's part of the problem. Part of the reason why they couldn't even be like a top 4 team in the world is that even within their distribution of players, they were sort of disobeying the rule by having someone in a carry role who couldn't actually fully carry like that. He should have been either a half carry or they should have had more supportive play. Now we've got Simple, Dosia, Marklov, and the 2 support players in that particular team. Actually, I might have fucked this up, actually. Let me think. Yeah, because the problem is Adren wasn't in that team. I might have fucked that one up, but I'll just say for the sake of argument, even though this doesn't work, I guess, actually, that Kucha and Angel were. Like, Angel, yes, I'll have that. He can be my support guy overall. Kucha, I guess, didn't really so much. He was probably more closer to a hybrid. Yeah, it's hard for that one, but in general, they fit the trend there. I might have fucked that one up, actually, now I think about it. Probably not the best example, but you see how I'm visualizing it anyway, so the rest of it works until I got to that point. So, okay, let's go for a team that goes the other way. We have 2 full carries, and we have 3 full support players. Now, I think you can see where this is starting to go. We're going to have a slight lack of firepower, which can be made up if our 2 carries really are, like, amazing and fully do their role to the max every time. But we're going to have a lot of support players, so we're massively dependent on the 2 carries. But we have a full complement of support players. And if they're really good, they can help us in terms of, like, tactics, team play. Now, the team I'm going to pick for this is I would pick LDLC before the French Shuffle. You remember the team? It was Kenny, wasn't Kenny S. It was Kiyoshi. No, it wasn't Kiyoshi. That. Fuck you. All these names starting with K, French guys. It was Kaylee and it was Apex. They're my 2 carries, the full carries. They have to carry and be very good at their carry roles. Otherwise, this team probably isn't going to win. But even when they're doing it, we need the other players to have the supportive aspect. So Happy was a supportive in-game leader. He was doing that role. You had Maniac. Well, come on, it's obvious he's a support player. And then you had Uzi as a support player. Now, look at that team if you think about it. Same as the Hellraisers team. They had all that skill. They could front run. They could bash your head in with that. But then at times when either the carries weren't uber godlike carrying or they needed more support play, that's where they broke down. Well, on this LDLC team, remember, they got to the top 4 of a major. They were 2 rounds away from making it to the final. But they didn't, and they never did win a huge tournament. I know people are going to be like, DreamHack Valencia, like, that's not a huge tournament. I'm sorry to break your heart on that one. They were never going to win a huge tournament. They were never going to be a top 3 team in the world because they did lack a bit of firepower. They had enough in terms of, they had quite a good setup, and if it went to the max, who knows, maybe they could have made a final. Like I said, at ESL 1 Clone, that could have happened. But they weren't going to win the whole thing. They did lack a little bit in here, and we could see what they lacked. And unless the metagame of other teams being similar to them, so that the new norm became to have the 2 carries and the 3 supports, they weren't going to be the best in the world, I'm afraid. Now let's go to a team that has 2 full carries, 2 half carries, and only 1 support player. Well, this sort of team, obviously immediately, is going to lack a bit of support play, and it will require at least one of the half carries to be able, more often than not, to give us some of that support play. If you can do that, it can balance it out. It's not going to be as much of a problem. And if you could do it perfectly, you could actually be the best team in the world like this. Because then you could, in theory, have 4 players carrying in a game and a support player. And then at other times, you could only have 2 carries carrying the game, and the 2 hybrid players could just play hybrid in the middle, and the support player. And this is the most versatile lineup, remember. Or you can have 2 carries carrying fully. The 2 hybrid players could be playing more on the support side. We have the 3 So essentially, that's the team, the meta team, which can dominate and be the best in the whole world. And they're able to do almost everything in terms of the lineup of their team because of the variety and versatility they have. And they can make up for each other. But it's going to be incredibly hard to do that because of the fact that the 2 half carries are going to be what's going to fuck us here. Unless those half carries are in the right sort of team and have the right mentality where they can switch up and know when they're not supposed to carry this game, they don't need to, and play more of the supportive role, and vice versa, when the carries aren't going and they need to do some of that, that's going to be so hard to make work. But if you could, in a computer simulation, it would be the best team. Now, people are going to think this is a setup, but that team exists. It exists right now. That team is Fnatic. So within that team, the 2 main carries, Crims, JW. There are 2 main carries. Everything's set up. I mean, I guess it's not in a weird way for Crims, but he's a main carry in terms of role in the game. They're the 2 main guys we need to carry to win the game in general. Our 2 half carries, that's Olaf M and that's Flusher. Now, Olaf M, when he first got into Fnatic, and they weren't doing that great when Crims was just starting to get into God mode, he was playing a lot more supportive. He was just setting Crims up. He's just doing a bit of this, doing a bit of that. He wasn't really even at the hybrid role sometimes. He would be hybrid, sometimes more supportive. Every now and then, very rarely, he'd give a big full carry game. Now he's fully settled into being a really good... He's probably the best hybrid player at the moment. He can go between the 2, whatever you need. And anytime he wants to, it feels like, if he really wants to, he can just step up and be the full carry. And other times he can go, right, I don't need to, I can sit back. Everyone else is doing it. And then who's the other one? Flusher. Well, Flusher obviously used to be like one of the best hybrids. He used to be the best hybrid overall. I felt like when Schneider and JW were supposed to be the carries in Fnatic, him as the hybrid was the real rock of the team. So in this team, he actually ends up playing supportive a lot more, and he'd play that role. So there we go. We've got the 2 main carries who are really good right now. The 2 hybrids who are 2... One of them's the best now, one was the best before. You take those two, and then who's the support? Well, that's Pronax. He's the in-game leader. He just plays heavily support because he doesn't need any carry potential whatsoever. He's got his team, and when that's why when Fnatic, not all the time, but when they're in their zone, when they're in their flow, when everything's working, all those players are playing those roles correctly. It's not that they're unbeatable, but they always have a little something extra over other teams. Like they can be losing a big game, and suddenly Flusher, who isn't even meant to be one of the main characters, can come up and be the guy who has the big game and help them win, or can play more supportive and they can win on tactics. And team play. I shouldn't really have drunk halfway in that sentence. Let's go to another team. Let's go more extreme. So remember, we're easing away from carries. We came from 3 carries. We're coming down. Now we're going to go to the world with 1 carry. So we're going to have 1 full carry. We're going to have 3 half carries. And we're going to have 1 support. Now this is going to make us the most versatile team imaginable. Because remember, we could still in some games have 4 carry potential players. But we could also have games where we have 4 supportive potential players. Now, I would say, first and foremost, this sort of team, it will be nearly impossible to win a tournament. Because it's already a fucking miracle. And Fnatic are the best example I could ever even think of in CSGO terms of being able to have the 2 half carries and make it work with the 2 full carry and win. Because of how much versatility those 2 players have to have. So to have 3 players who, within each other's roles, can read what's happening and can also switch properly between them all and join the 1 full carry is going to be so fucking hard that I don't think anyone could pull it off. But if you have the personnel, listen, you could still be very good because it will also make you very versatile. And because of the different skill sets you'll have, you'll be able to hang in there in games you shouldn't maybe sometimes. You'll be able to get the odd win that you probably shouldn't. So your level will seem pretty good, but you won't win because that's going to be almost impossible to pull off. That team exists. It exists right now. It existed last year. That team is Dignitas, the lineup that was now became TSM. Whether you have Fetish or whether you have Carrigan, take your pick. That's a team that has 1 full carry, Device. He's the main full carry, has to be the full on. And then they have the 3 half carries. So we'll just go with the most recent lineup. We'll say that's going to be Dupree, Zipnix, and Cajun B. And then the support player. Now that's the Fetish, the in-game leader, it's Carrigan. What is the problem with their team? Yes, they have all these different players who at different times can do it, but they don't have the set roles in the same way. Each player necessarily doesn't have the versatility of the role that he's defined in, and he can't always do both sides of that. Like, can Cajun B actually go and do supportive play sometimes? I don't think so, really. But can he be the full-on main carry? I think he could maybe get away with it, but he's not going to be as good as the full-on main carry as some of these other players I've mentioned in other teams. So they're kind of stuck in a middle ground there where they can't fully do either side. So their versatility that they would have, they can't quite pull it off to become the best team. And as a result, they get to the semis every single... We know the storyline are there. They don't win. They don't even make finals. They're quite an extreme example of that. But you can see where that would be very hard. So we'll keep going down. We're going to go... Remember, we're down into the world of 1 full carry now. So 1 full carry, 2 half carries, hybrids, and 2 support players. Now, this team, in general, is going to lack a little bit of firepower on average, because you've got the 1 full carry, and either he has to be a god, or you're just going to have the 1 full carry, and you're going to be playing a lot of teams that have 2 carries or more. And so what you're going to need there is at least one of your half carries has to be regularly capable of stepping up more often than a normal hybrid can. So if you can do that, you can match the firepower aspect. That's fine. But in general, we're going to have a little less firepower. But we have more supportive play and we have more potential for supportive players. Therefore, what we're going to do in this team is we're going to have enough firepower if we have the right half carry. And then on top of that, what we're going to add in is we're going to have some of the best tactics in team play. Then we can still be the best team. You know what team that is? That's almost every version of Titan / Very Games except the recent one where they got fucked over and had to bring RPK in. So let's think of Titan pre-Kaylee. Kenny S, the 1 main full carry, had to go God mode, was going God mode. Then who are our half carries? Now, Apex in LDLC could be considered main carry, but in Titan, a lot of the time wasn't. More like a half carry. And the other half carry, Kaylee. Again, he was a main carry in LDLC, but now we bring him this team. It worked better because there were 2 half carries. And so as long as one of Apex or Kaylee could have the big game to join Kenny S as a main carry, then we had enough firepower potential there. But we also had enough role-playing. We had Maniac and Existence doing the role-playing aspects, and then sometimes one of the others could settle that in. Now, they didn't have it. That's the one problem they had, is Apex and Kaylee could do the step up in that sense to be the main carry. They weren't as great when he went back into being more supportive. Like, Apex wasn't that great in a more supportive aspect. Kaylee couldn't really play more supportive. He was just passive AWPing, but Not necessarily more supportive, but there was a bit of it. That's why when it did work, they could beat anyone, but in general they weren't going to because they lacked a little bit of firepower and needed a little bit more on both ends of it, and so they couldn't quite be the best team, but they were very exciting to watch play because they could make up for it with the tactics and the team play. And like I said, any other version of Titan, well, we'll go back to another version of Titan. So remember when they had Shocks, when they were winning everything in very games? They had Shocks as the main one. Scream and NBK were the half carries. They were doing a very good job there. Scream could sometimes come up, but if he didn't, NBK could do it. There we go. There's the one full carry, the two half carries, and the two supports were Smiths and Existence. And that was one of the best teams ever. That team really did manage to get the mixture of the two because crucially, Scream could step up sometimes. He didn't always. That was the one X factor they had, is that he sometimes didn't step up enough. Meanwhile, NBK could not only do the carry role, but he was one of the best ever hybrid players to go down and do the supportive aspect. So there's an awesome team there. One carry, two hybrids, two supports. Let's go down further. One full carry, one half carry, three support players. Now we're leaning heavily towards the support side of things, and we're going to definitely lack firepower because our hybrids sometimes have to going to be a god just to give us enough firepower. And in this world, let me think. I mean, first of all, the full carry has to be an actual god. You know who this team is? It exists right now. This team is Titan right now. They can't be the best team in the world, because to be the best team in the world doesn't just mean to win the biggest tournament, by the way. Titan could win one of the biggest tournaments, but they couldn't be consistently, at least right now, in terms of who they've got right now, could not be the best team in the world. And like they couldn't be the best team in the world three tournaments in a row. They couldn't have the consistency of results and performance that would make you the best team in the world. So right now, Kenny S is the best carry in the world, so he's able to actually give them better results than they should probably have on this sort of a formulaic setup. The best carry in the world. They've got one half carry, which is Apex, and he can sometimes step up to that level, but in fact that's one of the problems, is he doesn't enough now in this team to really even be able to give them enough firepower, so it means Kenny has to be even more godlike to give them a chance in terms of firepower. So there's the carry and the half carry, the hybrid. Now who are the three supportive players? Now in an ideal world, this is where it would fix things for Titan, is if RPK could step himself up to being a half carry. Now you would be in a position where they could compete, and now they'll be in the game. It could potentially be a best team if everything went right. But at the moment, he's more towards a supportive side, and as much as he doesn't have the same carry potential, he can't do as many frags, he can't play that sort of bully role to the extent that he'd want. So he's more on the supportive side, and then obviously Maniac and Existence are supportive players. Let's go even more extreme, because people are going to wonder who these teams are. And I'll tell you already, there aren't going to be any more teams, because one full carry and four support players. Right, it would literally be impossible to be the best team doing that. Because even if your main carry was Kenny S, you can't have four supportive players and have him beat teams where the default norm is going to be two carries and three support players, or two carries and a hybrid carry. How's he on the carry side of the carrying aspect, going to out carry at least two players or 2.5 players? That's just no one could do that. Even Kenny S in full god mode could not make that team the best team in the world. So that team would not work. Likewise, go the extreme way. Let's go the other side of because I've been going down in terms of carries. Let's go up in terms of carries. 4 carries and 1 support. Right, in this world, to even have a chance to win, that support player better be the fucking best support player you have ever seen in the fucking universe, who's like a one-man god who can do everything. Because we don't even have a chance otherwise. And that team will never exist in CSGO. I mean, I guess when I started to break down the fucking Hellraisers example, maybe I could have picked this one as Hellraiser's DreamHack win, and that explains why they could never even make a semis of a major, and why they were never going to be the best team, no matter how much fucking fragging those star players did. And let's just, as a final note, do not even ask me, what about a team that has 5 support players and no carries? Or 5 carries and no support? Yeah, that would not work. And even no matter how many players are in denial, I also don't think any player would ever naively try to make such a team. I don't think it would ever even be attempted. And if it was, you'd never hear from them again, because they'd never get anywhere. So in general, whether or not I've actually gotten some dictionary definitions that you can stamp down and fucking put some fancy words next to and explain the pronunciation of, I think I've given you pretty good terminology of how I see the game and how I break teams down in my analytical process and how I think of the carries and how I conceptualize the way the game can be played, should be played, and then knowing the way it should ideally be played. I can look at what I have in terms of players and either ask, what do I need, or what can I change, or what are our win conditions? Like I told you there, I told you based on firepower, tactics and team play, what win conditions each of the teams had, and as a result, what they're going to need to match up against other types of teams. When you think that way, you'll be able to understand why a team like Titan could go against a team like current Fnatic. What conditions would have to happen on the Fnatic side for the Titan team to win, and on the Titan side for the Titan team to overcome them. Or vice versa, for Titan to not even have a chance of Fnatic to crush them flat. You can figure it out once you have this model in place. My model, at least. Everyone should have different models, and you should have multiple models. In fact, these have been kind of multiple models I've put into one overarching concept of the roles in Counter-Strike. But there's multiple ones at play here, and they can change. So I think it's an interesting topic to discuss anyway. No one's put themselves out there. No one's attempted to do it. Like any pro player now who's like, I don't agree with that. It's like, well, where's your video, mate? Where have you explained anything? You don't agree? Well, congrats. Here's a fucking medal. Go sit in the corner and not know what the fuck you're doing in your own team. And on that note, I think that'll be the end.